Globalization is an unstoppable process within our society, infiltrating our everyday lives through our technology and media sources, as well as the world organizations we see all around us. However, when most people talk about globalization, they address the economic impacts, often ignoring the effects it has on our cultural environments. But before we can fully understand the effects of cultural globalization, we must first understand what culture is. Anne Phillips refers to Raymond Williams, stating that culture is an ordinary part of the process through which any social organization develops, reproduces, and communicates. Personally, I feel I have experienced various cultures throughout my life, due to my migration from various countries during my developmental years. However, for my cultural inventory, I will mainly focus on my most recent migration from New Zealand to Australia around 7 years ago, and my struggle of assimilating into Australian culture. Through this lens, I will be able to analyze how I am both a product and agent of cultural globalization, and how my interaction with these concepts have led to a greater understanding of my cultural environment. I guess to be referred to as a product of cultural globalization, you must first have been influenced by a process of it throughout your life. Therefore, if you have lived in a transnational city like Sydney, you most likely have been influenced by foreign cultures through the large migrant populations, and subsequently are a product of cultural globalization. An interesting way in how people often become a product is through the various cultural industries, as highlighted by Shamsi El-Ajalai and Patrick Hayden in their report Critical Theories of Globalization. The report highlights how cultural industries are usually seen as institutions which are most directly involved in the production of social meaning. While living in New Zealand, I personally experienced this with the adoption of the haka by a majority of the national sports teams. If you didn't previously know what the haka is, it's a traditional war cry or war dance undertaken by Maori warriors before war. This tradition became popular throughout New Zealand in the early 1900s after it was adopted by the New Zealand national rugby team, the All Blacks, in 1905. During my primary school years there, between 2003 and 2011, I was taught the haka and regularly performed it at various sporting events and assemblies hosted by the school. Therefore, when I migrated to Australia, I was surprised by the lack of cultural integration with Australia's own Indigenous population. This played a major part in my perceived cultural exclusion during my early years of my high school experience, as even though both countries were relatively close to each other geographically, they had distinct cultural differences separating both how people think and act. Although while I definitely had trouble assimilating into Australia's cultural bubble, Australia and New Zealand's similar sporting culture allow me to slowly develop and obtain the needed cultural and social practices to incorporate myself into Australian high school life. These similar practices can be seen as a result of space-time compression. Dorian Massey refers to the phenomenon of space-time compression as the relative ease of global communication as the result of technological innovations. This ease of communication has allowed countries to adopt similar cultural practices and ideas that were previously not possible. This has allowed for the individual to become more influential than ever before, becoming an agent of globalization. Being an agent generally refers to the impact you have on the processes of cultural globalization throughout your everyday life. However, instead of referring to myself as an individual when covering my effects as a cultural agent, I will instead refer to the group which I believe I have played a major role in, that being a migrant to Australia. I also realize that my experience as a white, middle-class male migrant will differ from other migrants, so I will attempt to incorporate a wide range of experiences and areas to give a greater understanding of migrants' effects on Australia's culture. When looking at my local suburb of Marrickville, it is easy to see the effects of the migrant population. This is due to it being a multicultural suburb similar to that of Ashfield. Through Amanda Wise's study of Ashfield, she defines her perception of multiculturalism. She describes it as environments of ethnically different individuals interacting with one another as neighbors, shoppers, and workers. To create an environment like this, the general populace must facilitate inclusiveness to create a welcoming environment where ideas can be shared and developed. This can be seen through my local market in Marrickville on Addison Road, where each week people of various cultures and backgrounds gather to share and acquire local produce. This is important, as food is an easy way to share and discuss various cultures, as it is something everyone can relate to. Personally, through my recent experience as a migrant, I've noticed that majority of the things I had in common with my high school classmates were often things that had migrant origins, whether it's the sports we play or the food we like to enjoy. While it might seem small and meaningless, when I came to Australia, I introduced my friend group to a New Zealand sweet called Pineapple Lumps. You can say this candy is one of our group's go-to snacks now, and is ultimately part of my group's cultural identity. So, while it is hard for an individual to make a significant change in the broader cultural environment, the act of an individual discussing and sharing their cultural experiences makes them an agent of globalization. So now, 7 years removed from my migration, I can confidently say that I am a part of the Australian community, and recently I have even gotten my Australian citizenship. However, this does not mean that I've distanced myself from my previous cultural experiences. On the contrary, I believe I have added to my cultural experiences, further developing my cultural identity and helping shape the cultural identity of those around me.